Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's time for Krishna Bud. This is chapter 32, prayers by the Vedas Personified, as translated and presented in storybook form by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And this is part 8. It's a fairly long chapter, and reading it in installments. When the cosmic manifestation is wound up and returns, all the elements and living entities all return into the body of Mahavishnu, and they become dormant for some time. And then when it's time for the Lord to reawaken and for the cosmic manifestation to manifest again, then the Vedas personified surround the Lord in his sleep as he lies on the causal ocean, resting or sleeping, to wake him up. And they recite these prayers. So, beginning where we left off, the prayers of the Vedas personified. This conception of the material world is very nicely explained by Srila Rupa Goswami, who said that renunciation of this material world as illusory or false, without knowing that the material world is also the manifestation of the Supreme Lord, is of no practical value. The Vaishnavas, however, are free of attachment to this world because generally the material world is accepted as an object of sense gratification. The Vaishnavas are not in favor of sense gratification. Therefore, they are not attached to material activities. The Vaishnava accepts this material world according to the regulative principles of the Vedic injunctions. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the original cause of everything, the Vaishnava sees everything in relationship with Krishna, even in this material world. By such advanced knowledge, everything becomes spiritualized. In other words, everything in the material world is already spiritual, but due to our lack of knowledge, we see things as material. The personified Vedas presented the example that those who are seeking after gold do not reject gold earrings, gold bangles, or anything else made of gold, simply because they're shaped differently from the original gold. All living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and are qualitatively one, but they are now differently shaped in 8,400,000 species of life, just like many different ornaments which have been manufactured from the same source of gold. As one who is interested in gold accepts all the different shaped gold ornaments, so a Vaishnava, knowing well that all living entities are of the same quality as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, accepts all living entities as eternal servants of God. As a Vaishnava, then, one has ample opportunity to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead simply by reclaiming these conditioned, misled living entities and training them in Krishna consciousness, leading them back home, back to Godhead. The fact is that the minds of the living entities are now agitated by the three material qualities, and the living entities are therefore transmigrating, as if in dreams, from one body to another. When their consciousness is changed into Krishna consciousness, however, they immediately fix Krishna within their hearts, and thus their path for liberation becomes clear. In all the Vedas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities are stated to be of the same quality, Chaitanya, or spiritual. This is also confirmed in the Padma Purana, wherein it is said that there are two kinds of spiritual entities. One's called the Jiva, and the other is called the Supreme Lord. Beginning from Lord Brahma down to the ant, all living entities are Jivas, whereas the Lord is the Supreme Four-Handed Vishnu or Janardana. The word Atma can be applied only to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but because the living entities are his parts and parcels, sometimes the word Atma is applied to them also. The living entities are therefore called Jivatma, and the Supreme Lord is called Paramatma. Both the Paramatma and Jivatma are within this material world, and therefore this material world has a purpose other than sense gratification. The conception of a life of sense gratification is illusion, but the conception of service by the Jivatma to the Paramatma, even in this material world, is not at all illusory. A Krishna-conscious person is fully aware of this fact, and thus he does not take this material world to be false, but acts in the reality of transcendental service. The devotee therefore sees everything in this material world as an opportunity to serve the Lord. He does not reject anything as material, but dovetails everything in the service of the Lord. Thus, a devotee is always in the transcendental position, and everything that he uses becomes spiritually purified by being used in the service of the Lord. Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard. I worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always manifested as reality, even within this material world, which is considered by some to be false. The conception of the falsity of this material world is due to lack of knowledge, but a person advanced in Krishna consciousness sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. This is actually a realization of the Vedic aphorism, Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. The Personified Vedas continued. Dear Lord, less intelligent men take to the other ways of self-realization, but actually there's no chance to become purified from material contamination or to stop the repeated cycle of birth and death unless one is a thoroughly pure devotee. Oh dear Lord, everything is resting on your different potencies. Everyone is supported by you, as it is stated in the Vedas, Eko Bahunam Yo Vididhati Kaman. Therefore, your Lordship is the supporter and maintainer of all living entities, demigods, human beings, animals. Everyone supported by you, and you are also situated in everyone's heart. In other words, you're the root of the whole creation. Therefore, those who are engaged in your devotional service without deviation always worship you. Such devotees actually pour water on the root of the universal tree. By devotional service, therefore, one satisfies not only the personality of Godhead, but also all others, because everyone is maintained and supported by him. Because he understands the all-pervasive feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the devotee is the most practical philanthropist and altruist. Such pure devotees, thoroughly engaged in Krishna consciousness, very easily overcome the cycle of birth and death, and they as much as jump over the head of death. A devotee is never afraid of death or of changing his body. His consciousness is transformed into Krishna consciousness. And even if he does not go back to Godhead, even if he transmigrates to another material body, he has nothing to fear. A vivid example is Bharata Maharaj. Although in his next life he became a deer, in the life after that he became completely free from all material contamination and was elevated to the kingdom of God. The Bhagavad-gītā affirms, therefore, that a devotee is never vanquished. A devotee's path to the spiritual kingdom, back home, back to Godhead, is guaranteed. Even though a devotee slips in one birth, the continuation of his Krishna consciousness elevates him further and further until he goes back to Godhead. Not only does a pure devotee purify his own personal existence, but whoever becomes his disciple also ultimately becomes purified and able to enter the kingdom of God without difficulty. Not only can a pure devotee easily surpass death, but by his grace his followers also can do so without difficulty. The power of devotional service is so great that a pure devotee can electrify another person by his transcendental instruction on crossing over the ocean of nescience. The instructions of a pure devotee to his disciple are also very simple. No one feels any difficulty in following in the footsteps of a pure devotee. Anyone who follows in disciplic succession from recognized devotees of the Lord, such as Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Kumara, Manu, Kapila, King Prahlad, King Janaka, Sukadeva Goswami, Yamaraj, and so on, very easily finds the door of liberation open. On the other hand, those who are not devotees, but are engaged in uncertain processes of self-realization such as jnana, yoga, and karma, are understood to be still contaminated. Such contaminated persons, although apparently advanced in self-realization, cannot even liberate themselves, not to speak of others who follow them. Such non-devotees are compared to chained animals, for they're not able to go beyond the jurisdiction of the formalities of a certain type of faith. The Bhagavad-gītā, they're condemned as Vedavada. They cannot understand that the Vedas deal with activities of the material modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Lord Krishna advised Arjuna that one has to go beyond the jurisdiction of the duties prescribed in the Vedas and take to Krishna consciousness, devotional service. It's said in the Bhagavad-gītā, Nastraigunyo Bhavarjuna. My dear Arjuna, just try to become transcendental to Vedic rituals. Transcendental position beyond the Vedic ritualistic performances is devotional service. In the Bhagavad-gītā, the Lord clearly says that persons who are engaged in his devotional service without adulteration are situated in Brahman. Actual Brahman realization means Krishna consciousness and engagement in devotional service. Devotees are therefore real brahmacharis because their activities are always in Krishna consciousness, devotional service. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore a supreme call to all kinds of religionists, asking them with great authority to join this movement by which one can learn how to love God and thus surpass all formulas and formalities of scriptural injunction. A person who cannot overcome the jurisdiction of stereotyped religious principles is compared to an animal chained up by his master. The purpose of all religion is to understand God, develop one's dormant love for Godhead. If one simply sticks to the religious formulas and formalities, does not become elevated to the position of love of God, is considered to be a chained animal. In other words, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, he is not eligible for liberation from the contamination of material existence. Srila Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse which says, "Let others engage in severe austerities. Let others fall to the land from the tops of hills and give up their lives. Let others travel to many holy places of pilgrimage for salvation, or let them be engaged in deep study of philosophy and Vedic literatures. Let the mystic yogis engage in their meditational service, and let the different sects engage in unnecessary arguing as to which is the best. But it is a fact that unless one is Krishna conscious, unless one is engaged in devotional service, unless one has the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he cannot cross over this material ocean. An intelligent person, therefore, gives up all stereotyped ideas and joins the Krishna consciousness movement for factual liberation. Personified Vedas continued their prayers. Our dear Lord, your impersonal feature is explained in the Vedas. You have no hands, but you accept all sacrifices which are offered to you. You have no legs, but you can walk more swiftly than anyone. Although you have no eyes, you see what happens in the past, present, and future. Although you have no ears, you can hear everything that is said. Although you have no mind, you know everyone and everyone's activities, past, present, and future, and yet no one knows who you are. You know everyone, but no one knows you. Therefore, you're the oldest and supreme personality. Similarly, in another part of the Vedas it is said, you have nothing to do. You're so perfect in your knowledge and potency that everything becomes manifest simply by your will. There is no one equal to or greater than you, and everyone is acting as your eternal servant. Thus, the Vedic statements describe that the Absolute has no legs, no hands, no eyes, no ears, no mind, and yet he can act through his potencies and fulfill the needs of all living entities. As stated in Bhagavad-gītā, his hands and legs are everywhere. He's all-pervasive. The hands, legs, ears, and eyes of all living entities are acting and moving by the direction of the Supersoul sitting within the living entity's heart. Unless the Supersoul is present, it is not possible for the hands and legs to be active. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is so great, independent, and perfect, however, that even without having any eyes, legs, and ears, he's not dependent for others on his activities. On the contrary, others are dependent on him for the activities of their different sense organs. Unless the living entity is inspired and directed by the Supersoul, he cannot act.